Imagine the deep reaches of empty space, impossibly cold and dark. No movement, no life. It is in this environment that we see R2-D2, astromech droid of Luke Skywalker, drifting through space as if on an endless current. Suddenly, a light shines over the familiar, long-dead device. R2 is abducted. His hardware is analyzed by an exotic species known only as the Whills. From their research, they make an important discovery. Their origins begin a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Before I get into who I think the Whills are, I want to say this is a theory video that is attempting to glean the artistic intent of George Lucas and what might have been set up for his sequel trilogy. The research has been extensive. Even if you're doubtful of the conclusion I come to, this video will cover THX, Star Wars movies and the written drafts they're based on, American Graffiti, Joseph Campbell's book Hero with a Thousand Faces, George Lucas's college projects, interviews with Lucas, and other movies that might have acted as inspiration for Star Wars. So stick around if any of that interests you. Movies are a precarious medium for artists. It's this very delicate thing, and the process can be difficult to manage. In fact, most movies end up looking strikingly different from earlier states of development.
Bang, bang.
No, it's too late!
Bang, bang.
Anyway, versus the finished product.
Yes, I bet you have.
Bang.
Lucas was very good about shelving content when it doesn't
Sorry about the mess.
Lucas was very good about shelving content when it doesn't fit a film's story. So it can be difficult to glean what finished products might look like based on rough outlines alone. However, examining Lucas's first draft and his early influences gives us some insight into what Lucas likely intended in a sequel trilogy. When Lucas first sat down to write Star Wars, he retrieved a story synopsis he had hastily written previously to re-inspire him. Lucas titled this document, The Journal of the Whills. All but the first 2 pages of this document have been lost, or purposefully destroyed and never released to the public. Prior to that, Lucas was inspired by Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, and an idea called The Force, as described in a Canadian abstract film, 2187.
They become aware of some kind of force or something behind this apparent mask.
Aspects of these early sources are brought out in Lucas's early writings. Concepts like dogmatism, existentialism, and life-altering revelations. Let's first focus on the Journal of the Whills and how it might be setting up a sequel trilogy. Who are the Whills? What are they journaling? Well, the document reads as a story that's being told to the audience by a character named C.J. Thorpe. Since it's a short document, not too much happens in it. C.J. Thorpe is beginning to tell his life story. He used to be a pilot until he met the most powerful Jedi ever, then he switched to train in the Jedi Order. So, why isn't it called The Journal of C.J. Thorpe? Possibly, it's that this story is acting as some kind of Rosetta Stone for a futuristic species that it pertains to. Because, in this journal, supposedly, are other tales meant for the Whills, in which all of Star Wars is only one. The journal is an anthropological framing device for a fictional audience who are receiving it. In other words, the Whills. I believe Star Wars would be first in the Journal of the Whills because it's their origin story. In the book, How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, Lucas says in an interview that R2 is his ultimate framing device, and that the entire story of Star Wars is actually being recounted to the keeper of the Journal of the Whills. Remember that? 100 years after the events of Return of the Jedi by none other than R2-D2. A lot has changed in how Star Wars is written now versus how it was first conceived. But this interview in 2015 shows that Lucas was still interested in returning to his early writings before he sold Star Wars. I want to bring particular attention to this part in the Journal of the Whills. They were gathered under one roof, the most powerful warriors in the galaxy. When he, Mace Windu, entered the hall, the great and noble warlords fell silent. This shows the importance of great masters in Lucas's writings. More on this later. It has been argued that the title, Journal of the Whills, was written simply to imply there would be more stories, and was dropped for the more vague Star Wars, which also implies a chronology of stories. It is believed the Whills were repurposed into the Will of the Force in final drafts. This is not the case. Star Wars' original framework was part of its world building, and while it is true that elements of earlier drafts are lifted and fitted to new scripts, it wouldn't be fair to say these elements are always fully lifted and transplanted later in the exact same way. Therefore, how some of these retrofittings were applied have been misattributed. This may be because the first draft of Star Wars is wild. Lucas sold a second synopsis of Star Wars as a third film project. The Journal of the Whills was heavily lifted from an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, A Fighting Man of Mars, as a writing exercise. Lucas wrote the rough draft of Star Wars while waiting for his second film, American Graffiti, to be released. Even in earliest versions of Star Wars, though, some things have remained consistent. The first scene of the rough draft starts with Kane Starkiller, training his sons in the way of the Force. He refers to some understanding of magic as the 5 stages of the Force. It's interesting that the Force was understood in stages in the first draft. This could imply that once there were only 4 stages of understanding until a Jedi Master discovered a 5th. In both the first and final draft, Masters are legends that have already achieved great deeds, and their students are depicted as young savants, gifted in ways that may surpass previous generations. Kane, the father, is a great Jedi veteran of some ancient noble war. Anakin Starkiller, his son and the young protagonist, starts the film already at the 5th stage. In the rough draft, Anakin's training is finished by Luke Skywalker, another old master and general, after Kane dies in a heroic sacrifice. In a similar style, Jedi Master Obi-Wan sacrifices himself for Luke in the theatrically released film. It's noteworthy that there's always been this idea of redemption and cycles of revenge that go on for generations. Just like in the final film, in the first version of Star Wars, the Jedi Bendu were hunted to near extinction. Just as in the final version, the Empire has been expanding, and the film's story will mark a shift in this dynamic and the start of a new generation of Jedi. The first Lucas-only draft is what I find to be the most relevant for a sequel trilogy. At that time, Lucas had already written THX and American Graffiti. Francis Ford Coppola had been personally tutoring Lucas through college and was his executive producer.
He couldn't pay me. He said, what I'll do is I'll get you a deal to write a screenplay. And Francis went in there and said, we already have this deal to make movies and you have to give us a go-ahead. And he really did a lot of fast talking.
Gee, how much do we put in?
Never put your own money in the show!
I did that, and obviously our company went bankrupt and destroyed everything. Caused him to be forced to pay off the debts, which meant he had to go do The Godfather.
To cancel the show and give everyone their money back. Money back! Money back!
THX was a commercial flop. Lucas's first film cost Coppola enough money they had to rush into production of The Godfather. Before leaving, he challenged Lucas to write a more commercially viable film.
He challenged me, stop doing this artsy-fartsy stuff.
Yeah.
Make a movie, make a comedy. I dare you to make a comedy. Fran said, you can do a regular movie. Why don't you do a comedy? Why don't you do something that's really accessible to people?
That film would be American Graffiti, which was a very lucrative film, giving Lucas more breathing room in what he could do.
But I'd written all this other stuff. I'd spent a year writing this story. So I put it on the shelf and I said, by hook or by crook, I will finish this movie.
The writers that came after he sold the film are uncredited ghostwriters, but when they're done, the final draft is a noticeably different movie than the rough draft, leaving many writing elements shelved. For instance, the original rough draft has a Wookiee rebellion in the climax of the film, in which Wookiees pilot Star Destroyers, which here is referring to something akin to TIE fighters. This shelved content would be repurposed in Return of the Jedi with the Ewok Rebellion. Earlier in the story, a royal family is stymied by the local bureaucracy from properly mobilizing for war. Something very similar to this is present in The Phantom Menace with Queen Amidala. Also originally, the Emperor had like a very evil long mustache. I just think it looks cool. Also, the concepts that are present in earlier Lucas writings are toned down in Star Wars Final Draft. In the rough draft, among other changes, it's much less child-friendly. Anakin's child brother is cut in half by a Sith warrior in the first scene. A cute pet-like animal is also bisected by Vader. There's also a scene of Anakin punching a 14-year-old Princess Leia square in the face to knock her out.
I came from a very avant-garde documentary kind of filmmaking world. I like.
Originally, Lucas was interested in more auteur writing. I think Lucas's writing was trying to differentiate between the substance of religion, which he agreed with, from the context of the people who present it, whom are often wrong or nefarious. Consider this scene in THX. THX is having doubts about his beliefs. This is because, unknown to him, LUH has removed THX's mandatory drug treatment that keeps everyone obedient and dispassionate. So actually, THX is just waking up from indoctrination. He confesses these doubts to a Christ-like image that the people in the movie refer to as Om. But the image is actually a surveillance device. So his doubts are recorded and analyzed, which puts THX and his partner in danger. The image has a pre-recorded voice that arbitrarily responds to THX with phrases like, "Yes, I understand," and "Go on, my child." At the end of the confession is a pre-recorded message about the joys of conformity. If we think of the Force as the substance of religion, and the Jedi are the structure of religion, then Lucas presenting the Jedi as misinformed on the Force makes sense with his earlier writings. In this scene of THX is imprisoned in a white void that is supposed to be a metaphor for college, or rather, people who are unable to set off for the unknown. THX separates himself from the other nonconformists by taking that plunge, confidently. The movie ends with the main character escaping and discovering that there is a whole world outside the confines of his anthill society. It's a major shift and revelation for the character. The overall story of Star Wars saga has moved along these same lines. Audiences were confused and even offended by the midichlorian scene in The Phantom Menace.
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells, and we are symbionts with them. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
They saw this as a direct contradiction to what Yoda says in Empire Strikes Back.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
And what Obi-Wan says in A New Hope.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
My own view, however, is that these contradictions are entirely intentional. In the prequel trilogy, Jedi understand the Force through measuring midichlorians. Qui-Gon, being the first Force ghost, is meant to represent a shift in Force understanding. In the original trilogy, Jedi have adopted a more spiritual connection to the Force that allows them to do more things, like be a Force ghost. In a sequel trilogy, it follows that the Jedi would have a deeper understanding of the Force and are able to do even more things. Vader throwing Palpatine into a generator is the fulfillment of a great prophecy, which should lead to revelations as shocking and world-changing as Force ghosts. Specifically, that the midichlorians are evolving. The Force, in the Star Wars universe, is a theological field of study. It is reinterpreted and understood differently with time. This is setting us up for a third understanding of the Force. Similar to how vehicles are changing with the times, so too is the Jedi religion. There is more evidence of this progression other than changing technology. Within the films, there is a prophecy.
Possible he was conceived by the midichlorians.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force.
Okay. Why is balance important? What does it mean? It doesn't mean equal dissemination of Sith and Jedi powers. Lucas has been very clear that the Jedi represent balance and the Sith represent short-term growth or imbalance. The prophecy is fulfilled when Anakin throws Palpatine into a generator. This moment should be pivotal for a sequel trilogy, given the weight of it in the story. I do believe there would be Sith and bad guys in a sequel trilogy, but this moment unlocks a new era for Sith and Jedi's understanding of the Force. I believe the Jedi would embrace this change, and the Sith would reject it, and ultimately die off. Whatever that change is, it keeps the prophecy meaningful, tied to the moment of its fulfillment, and accurate that it's bringing balance to the Force. Which here would mean it is starting a new understanding of the Force, which are midichlorians evolving into Whills, that will lead to the end of the Sith. These generational cycles are clear influences of Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. The original trilogy is a hero's journey in which Luke rises to his challenges, changes for the better, and, as a result, improves the galaxy around him. In the prequels, Anakin rebels at his challenges, changes for the worse, and, as a result, the galaxy around him gets worse. Just as Anakin's journey bleeds heavily into the next generation, so too with Luke's journey. This is the hero's journey. It's a cycle.
This thing is just a fucking circle. You'd think it was so goddamn complicated.
Joseph Campbell was alluding to quintessential religious experiences like discovery or rebirth with his book.
Where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. And where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence.
Much has been said about Joseph Campbell. His works are no light read. They are dense texts that require studious attention. I want to focus on a few chapters in particular. The keys, which are at the end of the hero's adventure, and a few concepts in the cosmogonic cycle that are about the start and ending of cycles. These concepts are the end of microcosm, emanations, the virgin birth, transformations, and the end of macrocosm. Return of the Jedi leaves off with Luke around the end of Joseph Campbell's Adventure of the Hero. Arguably, there are few things left for Luke to do while a new cycle forms. This last part of the adventure is referred to as the keys. At this point, the hero is what Campbell calls the master of two worlds. He has been reborn and returned from his adventure. Here's how Campbell describes the hero at this point in the story. The hero does not mistake apparent changelessness in time for the permanence of being, nor is he fearful of the next moment, as destroying the permanent with its change. The final part, the keys, is about what the hero has learned and how he applies it. Campbell continuing on this concept, at the return threshold, the transcendental powers must remain behind. The hero re-emerges from the kingdom of dread, return, resurrection. The boon that he brings restores the world. One could say that when Luke returns, the boon or elixir he possesses is the destruction of the Empire and the redemption of Luke's father. Although it seems more accurate to say that these events fall into the previous step in the adventure that Campbell calls freedom to live. Many Odysseys end at freedom to live. The keys is the start of a third part of the hero's adventure, and the adventure isn't really complete until after this part. This is the part of the hero's adventure where he improves, or cures, the world around them. Obi-Wan, for instance, is going through the keys in Star Wars New Hope.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan has witnessed the end of old norms, both politically and spiritually. Obi-Wan tells Luke what he's learned, sets Luke up for the start of a new, better cycle, then gracefully bows out of the changelessness aspects of the new cycle to stay true to his eternal being. I'd also like to point out that the death of Obi-Wan marks a change in Luke's character, just as it did for Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Side note, what is it with Lucas and cutting people in half? Cycles, both large and small, are indicative of a psychology at the heart of human experience. Campbell makes this point continually in his works. Mythology, in other words, is psychology, misread as biography, history, and cosmology. The ancient monsters that we defeat are our former selves. The thresholds we cross are our own limitations, and we are reborn anew when we become aware of life-altering knowledge. The hero is each of us, not the physical self present in the mirror, but the king within. After the adventure, there are two kinds of dissolutions: an end of microcosm and an end of macrocosm. Microcosms have more to do with the content of the hero's adventure, and macrocosms have more to do with the context of the hero's journey. An example of an end of a microcosm in mythology would be funeral rites or prayers for the dead to get them to heaven or some such place. Those who truly have been reborn will have special knowledge in the afterlife. Campbell quotes the Hindu religion thus: "This person, i.e. the hero, frees himself from these limbs just as a mango releases itself from its bonds, and he hastens again to place of origin, back to life. All things wait for him who has this knowledge and cry, 'Here is the imperishable coming! Here is the imperishable!' We bury or sprinkle the dead with the knowledge that their eternal self is not destroyed, and that we might all be enriched by the essence returning to the divine." Yoda and Obi-Wan can be seen as heroes at the end of their microcosm. Free to live outside the typical cycles, light as a feather, they are separate from usual existentialism, or what the nature of existence feels like to the rest of us. Subsequently, their life's journey marks a shift in macrocosms around them. Lucas has said that Lord of the Rings is an important influence on Star Wars. I think this is because The Hero of a Thousand Faces was published in 1949 and Lord of the Rings, by J.R.R. Tolkien, was published in 1954. Tolkien was a Germanic history professor and Campbell was a comparative religion professor. Both studied ancient religion. Their work was contemporary to each other. Lord of the Rings is laid out in a way that adheres to Campbell's writings. If you don't know Lord of the Rings, I just want to make a few points on its world building. Isildur is the hero of the Second Age. He fights a cycle that began in the First Age. The end of his adventure marks the end of the Second Age. Isildur then resides over a time of peace, then new cycles begin to emanate and take form. Changes to the nature of magic and how history is recorded, or changes in the faces of evil, from Melkor to Sauron to the Ring, are macrocosms. Melkor was a deity, Sauron an angel, and the Ring of Power was a good thing for mankind originally. The fall of Melkor marks the forming of the nature of evil, and also less magic being in the world. The defeat of Sauron marks the end of man's fall from grace, as well as removing more magic from the world. The destruction of the ring marks the moment man conquered the world, as well as removed even more magic. With each macrocosm, how mankind perceives the world and the nature of magic changes. Each era also works as a hallmark of the people keeping better records of lineage due to improvements in society. In real life, Germanic king's lineage was remembered orally through the tale of Beowulf before it could be written down. So, in real life, the end of Beowulf also marks the beginning of a truer lineage of kings. That is all to say that macrocosms are very real and have real structure. A macrocosm in mythology would be the end times in Revelations, which occurs after the sacrifice of Jesus because of his sacrifice. As Campbell puts it, "As the created form of the individual must dissolve, so that of the universe also." Similar to personal cycles, seasons change and begin again. Trees grow, wither, and die, while forests of new trees perpetually spring forth from the old. We sense large forces pulling us in life, both spiritual and real. We also see the effects of our lives rippling into future generations. The start of an odyssey or epic is also the end and start of old and new macrocosms. In literature, or rather in mythology, or rather in psychology, macrocosms are indicated by certain elements. According to Campbell, the main indicators of a macrocosm are either emanations, and/or the virgin birth. All these indicators will be the things that lead to the transformation of a new hero.
A little short for a stormtrooper.
Huh?
Campbell lists many types of emanations and virgin births in mythology, but I'm going to focus on just a couple types of emanations that I feel are relevant. In Star Wars, as pointed out earlier, macrocosms are at work. Knowledge and spirituality are building upon themselves in cycles that are themselves also building to something. We could say that the start of one of these Star Wars macrocosms is the discovery of the Force. Another one would be jumps in technology, like the invention of interstellar travel. And finally, the prophecy of the fall of the Sith is another macrocosm. The Force seems to have come from nothing, or it came from a void, or it came from a place without shape. It is a type of emanation itself of its own macrocosm, that emanation being out of void, space. In mythologies, things come from formless places or nothingness and are given shape, just as, when we dream, the dreams emanate out of formlessness. Campbell writes, "In dreams, the images range from sublime to ridiculous. The mind is not permitted to rest with its normal evaluations, but is continually insulted and shocked out of assurance that now, at last, it has understood. Each night we have new dreams that come from formlessness. These emanations that lead to new cycles are always, by their nature, shocking. So too seems to be the nature of the Force. Its next emanation, logically, according to Campbell, is, within space, life. The macrocosms in the Bible could be described as follows. From nothing, the world was formed. From the world, man was formed. From man came Jesus. From Jesus, the end times. In Star Wars, it would be, from nothing came the midichlorians. From midichlorians bonding with man came the Force. Man combining with the Force led to the Skywalkers. From Skywalker came the Whills. Consider that in his 2015 interview, Lucas says that Star Wars is being articulated by R2 to the Whills 100 years from the events of Episode 6. 100 years sounds like the end of another macrocosm after Return of the Jedi. In other words, the epilogue of another trilogy.
It's sort of boiling down religion into a very basic concept. The fact that there is some deity or some power or some force that sort of controls our destiny.
And you need to tell the same story over and over again every generation, so that generation gets it. And I think we've gone for a few generations where a lot of the sort of more basic stories have fallen by the wayside. Myths help you to have your own hero's journey, find your individuality, find your place in the world, but hopefully remind you that you're part of a whole, and you don't have to get into a giant laser sword fight and blow up 3 spaceships to become a hero. I mean, it's a very small thing that happens every day of your life.
Both Campbell and Lucas believe religion wasn't always static and should endeavor not to be static today, alive and personal. Mythology is defeated when the mind rests solemnly with its favorite or traditional images, defending them as though they themselves were the message that they communicate. I view the Force as a soul or something that is soul-like, ephemeral, ghostly. From the void beyond all voids unfold the world-sustaining emanations. Emanations are to be regarded as shadows from the unfathomable reach beyond, the profundities sounded by the hero in his adventure. Later in Emanations, in the section Within Space, Life, Campbell speaks of a cosmic egg. The content of this egg is something similar to what, I believe, inspired the notion of the Force, as was described in the previous section. Just as a chick comes from an egg and then grows up to be a bird, in ancient spiritual tales, religious magic is transforming or evolving. Campbell puts it like this. The evolution of life, described by our modern science of biology, is the theme of early stages of the cosmogonic cycle. Keep in mind that midichlorians are just single-celled organisms. He goes on to describe the next emanation of space to life as, not uncommonly, the cosmic egg bursts to disclose an awesome figure, the anthropomorphic personification of the power of generation. the mighty living ones. If the Force is the yolk in the egg, then the mighty living ones are who the Force will become, which, I believe, Lucas is referring to as the Whills. Star Wars is a religious tale, which says more than direct metaphors could. The next story is the next step in a cycle, and the previous story is the previous step. To put it another way, The Tortoise and the Hare is an enclosed moral story with direct metaphors and lessons, whereas Buddha approaching the Bodhi tree is an illusory tale that's part of something bigger. When Lucas sold Star Wars, he did so with explicit conditions.
I had made a decision to move ahead on the next Star Wars series, and we were starting to do that. And we were working with a writer. It wasn't quite working out, but I was also stepping away a little bit and turning things over to Kathy Kennedy. And I had the story treatments or, outlines.
Now, we don't know all of what Lucas requested in an official sequel trilogy, but we do know one thing for sure. They didn't listen to him. At all.
Disney, who was a little nervous, there's one of the issues was the first 3 movies had all kinds of issues. They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. It started here and it went there. And it's all about generations. And they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing. And so I decided, fine. They wanted to do a retro movie. I don't like that. Every movie I worked very hard to make them different. I make them completely different with, different planets, with different spaceships, with different, to make it new.
Now, that's interesting. So Lucas never outlined the sequel trilogy to be a soft reboot or remake or any other cynical cash grab.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
okay, but yes, exactly. Well, actually, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Da'ita, because this implies Lucas was looking to take Star Wars in another radical direction, like he did with the prequels. And it's also likely another trilogy would bring further coherence to Lucas's work as a whole, or would attempt to. Also, as previously stated, some shelved content from rough drafts was shelved with the intention of being used in later writings, possibly in a sequel trilogy. We can also see that the new executives of Star Wars viewed his ideas as extreme.
I have story treatments of 7, 8, and 9 and a bunch of other movies, and obviously we have hundreds of books and comics and everything you could possibly imagine. So, I sort of moved that treasure trove of stories and various things to Kathy, and I have complete confidence that she's going to take them and make great movies. I would back her up, and I would be there if, and especially helping with the script and making sure the script there's a lot of blank spots in the story treatment that hopefully we can fill in.
I think the incredible thing about George is, this is not like a series of books like Harry Potter where you've already got a template of what the stories might be. These are original stories and original ideas. As we work our way through these scripts, if we're sitting and saying, I wonder if this character can do that, or does this make sense within the rules of Star Wars? That really, he's the keeper of the flame when it comes to that.
It's the same thing with the first 3 films. That's all my job is to be the keeper of the flame.
Too intense indeed to be even remotely considered for what they wanted to do with the franchise. I believe my theory addresses these radical, unused ideas. But there would be other elements in a Star Wars trilogy. Things that would be the content of a microcosm or a hero's adventure. These specifics are not as rigid in structure. Any adventure would do, as long as it is tied to shifts in the world around it, making the story into an epic.
14 in our society is just sort of 18 to 22, somewhere in there. That you must let go of your past and must, embrace your future. And in your own self, by yourself, figure out what it is, what path you're going to go down.
Watch this. It's likely that since the first trilogy tells the story of young Anakin and the second trilogy tells the story of teenage Luke, that a third trilogy would also be a coming-of-age tale. Similar to the Star Wars movies, American Graffiti is a coming-of-age tale. It is also an example of how Lucas writes a coming-of-age tale. It is also extremely anti-establishment. While less auteur than THX, it is equally filled with rage directed towards society. The characters do wildly inappropriate or unlawful acts, and these actions are glorified by the film.
Mr. Wolf?
Jane?
I know all these messages are confusing, but it all boils down to this. Fuck society. This world belongs to you now. Shape it as you think best. Conventional wisdom and tradition is upheld by fools and villains. Don't fall into the paths that have been dug for you. In Star Wars, similarly, this spirit of rebellion is kept by the heroes, and the spirit of authority is kept by the villains. A new hero would be coming of age in some ways in their first movie, but times need to change for conventional wisdom to be appropriately challenged. What worked for Daddy's generation probably won't work for you. The final major influence in Star Wars is an East Asian influence. I believe this too was intended to carry through all trilogies. A sense of honor among warriors, a monk-like style of training among masters and apprentices, samurai-like sword fights. Most of these influences are noticeably derived from Kurosawa films. The main Kurosawa movie that inspired the first Star Wars is Hidden Fortress. It's hard not to think of Star Wars when watching it. It follows a very similar story. A princess attacked and stranded behind enemy lines has to return to her country with gold to prepare for the new war. The motley crew that escorts her are lifted verbatim from this movie and reincorporated into Star Wars at times. I believe when Lucas looked forward to the ultimate fates of his characters, he would most likely be thinking of these 5 Kurosawa movies: Sanshiro Sugato, Part 2, Ikiru, Yojimbo, Sanjuro, and Redbeard. All these films predate Star Wars. Additionally, because all these films contain noble characters at the end of their journey, they can be used to inspire events of Luke Skywalker's later life. Luke's entire life would only be a microcosm in Star Wars. The end of his journey doesn't necessarily mean the end of his life. The end of Luke's journey merely is the prerequisite of new cycles. Look at this fight at the end of Sanjuro. In Sanjuro, these 2 samurai have unresolved matters of honor, which must be settled before either can achieve a true freedom to live. Lightsaber fights are very reminiscent of samurai sword fights. When Obi-Wan and Vader size each other up, we as an audience can feel them regarding each other. Obi-Wan igniting his lightsaber is similar to how a samurai might unsheath his sword. It's an emotional beat. They lock blades and discuss matters of honor. In both films, the fight is being witnessed by a younger generation of warrior. Picture instead Luke with a school of disciples, fighting a Sith with whom he has unresolved matters of honor. When the fight is over, the disciples comment on how splendid of a warrior their master is. He would admonish them and say that the mark of a good Jedi is one who can avoid fights. He would view the Sith as a warrior, like himself, on another path. He would instruct his disciples to do all they can to avoid a fight. They then regard him differently, now aware of the harsh trials of life and the responsibility to carry Luke's honor to a new generation. Let me give one final example of Kurosawa's generational cycles via the movie Redbeard. In the film, a younger doctor in training is sent from a prestigious school to work at a free clinic as a form of punishment. Consider instead a Force-sensitive individual with imperial sympathies. Each time he helps someone, though, he finds his morality is shifting. In the scene, Redbeard and his student are discussing the morality of lying to a grieving widow. Redbeard gives some justifications for why he did what he did, but makes no final moral stances on the matter. It is the final straw for the student, and he suddenly breaks down in tears. He says it is because he is reflecting on the man he was when he first met Redbeard, and now he is unable to bear how ashamed he is of his former self. I think it would be good to see imperial sympathies shift to something more egalitarian. The specifics of Luke's role in a sequel trilogy are not as important as his role in generational cycles. Star Wars movies are exciting because the stakes feel so real. In Star Wars movies, there's this notion of degradation. The good guys seem to be okay with it, and even use it to their advantage. The bad guys do everything they can to stop it. Droids degrade over time. This process can be reversed by giving a droid a memory wipe, but without one, we see droids go from soulless killing machines to bumbling goofs. Conversely, we see that R2's personality gives him an advantage. Vehicles also degrade over time. The Empire uses mass production to handle this. On the other side, the Rebellion reworks old machines. Jedi accept their fate and live on in the Force, whereas Anakin is hell-bent on stopping death. The midichlorians inside the Jedi form a symbiotic relationship. Alternatively, when Sith are bad, the midichlorians eat away at their hosts from the inside. Midichlorians are not just the Force by a different name, but proof that the Force is a living entity with behavior and motivation. Vader is surprised when he chops at a surrendered Obi-Wan and his robes fall to the floor. It's an unexpected new power for Vader. Earlier in the movie, when Obi-Wan says he's not dead, not yet, he looks up, implying he's aware of past friends and he will be joining them. Obi-Wan is the first to approach the afterlife with this understanding. There are important shifts happening around the characters that they don't seem to be in control of. These events hold significance for the Whills, those interested in a larger, overarching story. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, is not meant for us, the audience here on Earth. It is a fictional prologue for a fictional audience. The Whills are the evolved form of midichlorians, so it's long time ago for them. Magic is diminishing in the Star Wars galaxy and will eventually fully leave it, or dissipate. As is the nature of magic in all epics. The Whills are the ones who are now, in present time, in a galaxy far, far away. In the prequels, Anakin is a virgin birth, conceived by midichlorians from nothingness. Anakin is the first individual born of midichlorians. His life, and the prophecy tied to it, are all clear indications that the events of his life will shape the galaxy around him. His life is a microcosm. The specifics of a hero's adventure can vary, but all epics indicate shifts in macrocosms. I believe Lucas's intent was to make 3 trilogies that tell a new, complete religious text. If R2 is the ultimate framing device, it stands to reason that the Whills don't have other sources to pull from. The Whills are not interested in R2's story because it's a cool tale. Rather, they are focused on documenting the cycles that the Force went through. It's likely they don't have memory of their earlier evolution now that they are the new, mighty living ones. In mythology, magic is both shocking and dissolving. Midichlorians becoming the Whills may mean no new Force sensitives, which would give a 3rd trilogy a sense of finality. This original intent was never abandoned by Lucas. In fact, Lucas routinely returned to his original writings to flesh out his idea. The Skywalkers are meaningful to the Whills because they are the ones who fulfilled the prophecy of their origin. Force understanding is growing and building to something, each generation of apprentices building on the previous. If this is a metaphor for religion, it works neatly with Campbell and Lucas's belief in religion needing to be more subject to change. When I first saw Star Wars, I remember getting a little misty-eyed when Luke turned off his targeting computer. I naturally understood Luke's faith was what was needed to cure the galaxy. Star Wars challenged me. The stakes and structure of an epic help reason out the value of faith and courage. When Luke turned off his targeting computer, I felt myself also accepting the leaps of faith required to be my own personal hero. An Alliance ship bursts through hyperspace at light speed. Aboard the ship, cheers rattle through corridors. Passengers are celebrating a great victory over the remnants of the Empire. The last Sith Masters are dying, destroyed from the inside by powerful Force energy. In the common area, medals are being awarded. Jedi Master Luke Skywalker excuses himself from the humdrum of youthful revelry, electing instead to meditate in his room. Confident in the virtuosity of his apprentice, he has decided to retire. He reaches out his hand to retrieve his lightsaber, which is laying on a nearby table. Outside, Luke's companions hear him scream and rush in to help. A visible, fluvial tentacle is emitting from Luke's hand. It lifts the nearby lightsaber hilt into the air. This is the forming of a powerful new species. The first will beginning to leave its host. So yeah, that's my Star Wars theory. I'm thinking about making a 1.5 video to help expound upon some things, but I also have plans for Atomic Yak 2, 3, and 4, which will be on other topics. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, or you can also support me on my Patreon. Share the video, would be cool. I'm just starting out, so I'm looking to build a community of awesome people, or really, anyone interested in thoughtful conversation. There's a lot I'd be interested in discussing. Thanks to everyone who made this happen. I love you. And until I see you later, Atomic Yak is me.